In the blink of an eye, life can change, whether it's in a moment of injustice, kindness, or fate. Imagine this: a young black girl, caught in a tense situation, standing beside her father, trying to make sense of the chaos unfolding around her. The air is thick with the weight of tension, and what happens next will leave you speechless. On a seemingly ordinary day, an encounter with the police turns into something extraordinary. As the girl's father watches helplessly, a cop's hand swings toward his daughter. The slap is harsh, sudden, and feels like a slap to society itself, raw, painful, and unnecessary. The shock and confusion ripple through the crowd, and you can almost hear the collective gasp. But then something happens. Just as all seems lost, justice doesn't come from where you might expect it. This is not just about the girl, the father, or the cop. This is about karma, about how the universe sometimes has a way of righting the wrongs when we least expect it. And then, just as you're starting to process the injustice, a new chapter unfolds. A young black teen, sitting on a crowded bus, notices something: a pregnant white woman struggling to find a seat. Without hesitation, the teen rises from his spot, offering it to her. It's a simple act of kindness, one that seems almost too small to matter. But this is where the story takes a turn. The woman, thankful but surprised by his gesture, hands him a note as she exits. The teen doesn't think much of it at first. Who would? A note from a stranger. But this note? This note is about to change his life forever. Just when you think you've seen it all, the twists keep coming. The girl, the father, the cop, the teen, and the pregnant woman, all connected in ways that defy explanation, but all playing roles in something much larger than themselves. Karma, it seems, is never too far behind. But what exactly does the note say? And how will the events that unfold after the slap and the bus ride intersect? Will justice be served? Will fate continue to surprise these individuals with its uncanny timing? Stay tuned as we unravel a story where every action, no matter how small, can lead to life-changing consequences. You won't want to miss what happens next. As the scene continued to unfold, it became clear that this wasn't just another ordinary day. The slap, though a physical action, was symbolic in a way that struck at something deeper within the hearts of those who witnessed it. The black girl, no older than 16, stood frozen, her eyes wide in disbelief as her father's voice crackled in the air, pleading for the officer to stop. The cop, a figure of authority, had crossed a line that not only shattered the girl's sense of safety, but also ignited a spark of something far greater. Her father, a man of few words but immense strength, was visibly shaken. He had always tried to shield his daughter from the harshness of the world, to protect her from its injustices. But that slap, the force of it, the injustice of it, was something he couldn't shield her from. He wanted to scream, to fight back, but something held him back. Maybe it was the realization that standing up in that moment could put them both in even more danger. Maybe it was the quiet rage that simmered inside him, making him question the system that was supposed to protect them. The crowd around them was silent, uncertain of what to do. Some had their phones out, capturing the moment, while others looked away, unable to bear witness to the ugliness unfolding. But what they didn't know was that this moment, though painful, would set off a chain of events that would reverberate far beyond that street corner. The slap, brutal and unexpected, wasn't the end of the story. It was just the beginning. As the cop turned to walk away, seemingly unfazed by the damage he had caused, the girl's father whispered something under his breath, a promise to his daughter that he would make sure no one would forget this moment. It was a quiet vow, but one that would echo in the corners of his mind every day thereafter. As the scene began to dissipate, people murmured amongst themselves, their voices thick with anger and disbelief. But no one seemed to notice the young black teen sitting a few rows away, staring out the bus window, lost in his own thoughts. He was a kid who had lived through his own struggles, racial prejudice, unfair expectations, and a society that often overlooked people like him. But he had learned to keep his head down and stay out of trouble. He wasn't one to get involved in things that didn't directly affect him. But that day, fate had different plans for him. The bus ride was uneventful at first, just the usual mix of commuters, each in their own little world. Some people were glued to their phones, others were lost in thought, while a few had headphones in, completely unaware of what was going on around them. The young teen, who had spent the past few weeks working extra hours at his part-time job, just wanted to get home, maybe grab something to eat, and collapse into bed. But as the bus made its way through the busy streets, something caught his attention. A woman, heavily pregnant, was standing near the door, holding onto the railing with one hand and clutching her belly with the other. She looked uncomfortable, struggling to keep her balance as the bus jerked forward with every stop. Without thinking, the teen stood up. It wasn't out of any obligation. It was just instinct. He had been raised to respect others, to offer help when it was needed. And in that moment, he couldn't shake the image of this woman, pregnant and struggling, trying to make it through the bus ride. "Ma'am, you can take my seat," he said softly, his voice barely above a whisper. The woman, startled at first, looked up at him with a mix of gratitude and surprise. She hesitated for a moment, glancing at the crowded bus, before shaking her head. No, it's okay," she replied, her voice tinged with embarrassment. "I don't want to take your seat." The teen, however, wasn't having it. "It's really no problem," he insisted. "You need it more than I do." She finally gave in, nodding gratefully. As she sat down, the teen stood by the door, trying to blend into the crowd, his mind drifting back to the chaotic scene he had witnessed earlier in the day. He couldn't shake the image of the girl and her father, their lives disrupted by an event that was all too familiar. He couldn't help but feel a sense of helplessness, as though there was nothing he could do to change things. As the woman settled into the seat, she reached into her bag and pulled out a small, crumpled piece of paper. "Thank you again," she said, her voice warmer now. "You're a kind soul. This is for you." She handed him the note, and without waiting for his response, she looked out the window as the bus continued on its route. The teen, taken aback, stared at the note for a moment before unfolding it. At first, he thought it might be a simple thank you note, a gesture of kindness from a stranger. But as he read the words, his heart skipped a beat. The note wasn't just any note, it was a message, a life-altering one. The words on the paper seemed almost too surreal to be real. In a few short lines, the note revealed that the woman wasn't just anyone. She was someone important, someone with connections, someone who could offer him a chance he had never imagined. The words on the paper didn't make sense at first. They seemed vague, cryptic even, like some kind of puzzle he would have to figure out. But there was no mistaking it. This was an opportunity, one that could change the trajectory of his life. The note spoke of possibilities, of doors opening that he had never even known existed. But as he stared at the note, something in the back of his mind kept nagging him. What was the catch? Why him? Why had she chosen to give him this note? There were too many unanswered questions, and the weight of uncertainty hung heavy in the air. It felt like the calm before a storm. Everything was quiet, but something bigger was coming, something he wasn't quite ready for. His fingers clenched around the note, his thoughts racing. What was he supposed to do now? Should he act on the message? Or was this some kind of mistake, some cruel joke? He glanced over at the woman, but she was already lost in her own world, staring blankly out the window as the bus made its way through the city streets. The mystery of it all was too much for him to ignore. He had to know more. What had prompted this woman to hand him this note? And what was the true meaning behind her words? The more he thought about it, the more questions arose. But one thing was for sure, this was just the beginning. The slap, the note, the encounters, they were all leading somewhere. The tension was building, the stakes higher than anyone could anticipate, and neither the teen nor the girl and her father could have any idea what was about to unfold. The only thing certain was that their lives were about to change in ways they couldn't possibly imagine. The weight of the note felt heavier with every passing second. The young teen stared down at the words, but they blurred together in his mind. What was he supposed to do with this cryptic message? His heart raced, his palms sweaty from the anxiety creeping up his spine. He had lived most of his life just trying to get by, trying to stay unnoticed, to make it through each day without rocking the boat. But now, It felt as if he was standing on the edge of something vast and uncertain, a cliff where one step forward could either lead to something incredible or to disaster. The bus continued on its route, oblivious to the storm swirling inside the teen. He kept his gaze fixed on the note, rereading the words. The woman had promised that it would be life-changing, but what did that really mean? Who was she, and why had she picked him of all people? His mind flashed back to the earlier event, the slap. That image of the black girl, her father's expression of helpless anger, the brutal unfairness of it all. It lingered in his thoughts, fueling a sense of outrage he had never felt so intensely before. There was something wrong with the world. He had always known it, but today it felt more real than ever. He couldn't just stand by, could he? As the bus stopped at the next corner, the doors opened and a few passengers shuffled off. The teen looked around. Nobody seemed to notice him or the note. No one saw the burden he was now carrying, the uncertainty that had taken root deep in his chest. The woman had offered him a chance, but what was he supposed to do with it? Was this his moment to finally make a difference, to stand up for something bigger than himself? Meanwhile, back on the street where the slap had taken place, the father of the girl remained frozen in his fury, trying to process everything that had just happened. The slap was a violation, but it wasn't just a violation of his daughter's personal space. It was a violation of something much bigger, something systemic. He had lived through decades of subtle and not-so-subtle racism, always having to teach his daughter how to navigate the world with caution and restraint. He had told her time and again to keep her head down, to stay out of trouble, to avoid making waves. But that slap shattered everything. His daughter's face was still raw with shock, tears brimming in her eyes, but she didn't cry out. She simply stood there, speechless, her eyes locked on the officer as he walked away, unbothered. She didn't understand why the world could be so cruel. Her father, though, had seen it all before. He had felt the sting of injustice too many times to count. The anger inside him was boiling over, but he kept it in check, afraid that if he lost control, everything might spiral into something much worse. But what was he supposed to do? The cop had left the scene without a word, the crowd dispersing, murmuring quietly amongst themselves, but no one had stepped forward. No one had said anything to hold the officer accountable. This was how it always went. The system was designed this way. And he, as a black man, was once again reminded of his place within that system. The father knew that if he didn't act now, if he didn't make sure this moment was recorded, it would just fade away like every other instance of injustice. No one would care. No one would even remember. He pulled out his phone, his hands trembling slightly, and began to record the street corner. He wasn't sure what he would do with the video yet, but he needed something. Something to hold on to. His daughter stood beside him, watching him silently. He could feel the tension in the air, the unspoken bond between them. She didn't need to ask what he was doing. She understood. But what she didn't understand was why the world was so unfair. Her innocence, shattered in that moment, was now replaced by a quiet, seething frustration. She had always trusted that the world would be kind, that people would stand up for what's right. But now she knew better. Her father's silence spoke volumes, and she felt it in the pit of her stomach, a knot that wouldn't loosen. The bus, meanwhile, was still making its way through the city, but the teen could feel the uncertainty gnawing at him. He had already seen the injustice of the slap, and now this note, with its mysterious promises of change, was pulling him in two directions. Part of him wanted to forget about it, to crumple the paper up and let it fade into the background of his life. It was easier that way. Life was easier when you just kept your head down. But something told him that this wasn't one of those times. The more he thought about it, the more he realized that he couldn't ignore what had happened earlier. The girl, her father, the officer, they had all been caught in something much bigger than themselves. It was a pattern, a cycle, one that played out over and over again, with different faces but the same story. And if he turned away from it now, if he let this opportunity slip through his fingers, would he be any better than the bystanders who had looked away when the slap had occurred? A voice in his head urged him to take action, but there was also a deep fear within him. What if he wasn't enough? What if he couldn't make a difference? He had grown up learning to accept that the world wasn't always fair, that there were certain things he simply couldn't change. It had been easier to tell himself that his actions didn't matter. But now, with this note in his hand, he felt like he was standing at a crossroads, an intersection where one path could lead to something unimaginable, and the other could just be another dead end. He clenched the note tightly, wondering if he was ready for whatever was coming next. If he acted on this, if he sought out the opportunity the woman had hinted at, what would it mean for him? For the girl and her father? For everyone who had witnessed the slap? Meanwhile, as the father continued recording, his mind was filled with the same question. What would it take to make the world notice? To make people understand? He had spent his life trying to navigate the system, trying to protect his daughter from it, but now it felt like it was closing in on him. If he couldn't make a change, what was the point of anything? Was it worth fighting against a system that had always been stacked against him? The tension in the air grew thicker as both the teen and the father grappled with their internal conflicts. One was holding onto a note that could change everything, while the other was clinging to the last remnants of his hope for justice. Neither knew what the future would hold, but one thing was certain. The world was about to shift, and no one would be able to ignore it for much longer. The bus ride felt longer than usual, the air inside thick with a tension that the teen could feel even in his bones. His hands gripped the note tightly, the edges crinkling under the pressure. He kept his gaze focused on the words, trying to make sense of the jumble of promises that seemed too good to be true. His mind raced with questions. Who was this woman? What was she offering me? There had to be something more, something hidden beneath her kind gesture. Nothing in life came without a cost. He glanced around the bus, noticing the way everyone else was oblivious to the storm inside him. People were lost in their own worlds, unaware of the gravity of his moment. The woman had left him with an opportunity, but it felt like a puzzle he wasn't sure how to solve. His thoughts kept drifting back to the girl and her father. Their faces haunted him, the injustice of what had just happened etched into his memory. He couldn't help but wonder if they, too, were standing at a crossroads, unsure of what to do next. The bus slowed to a stop, and the teen instinctively glanced out the window. He saw the city stretching out before him, the usual chaos of cars and pedestrians, the blur of faces, all living their own stories. And yet, for him, it felt like everything was converging in this one moment. The world was moving forward, but he was stuck, paralyzed by uncertainty. He shifted his weight, his mind torn between two choices. One path, the one the note seemed to offer, was filled with unknowns, filled with promises of change and possibility. The other, the safer path, was one where he could turn away, crumple the note, and forget it all. He knew he could do that. It would be easier, safer. But deep down, something was pushing him forward, urging him to take the risk. What if this was my chance to do something bigger than myself? Just then, his phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him out of his spiraling thoughts. He pulled it out quickly, his heart racing as he saw the notification. It was a message from a friend, someone who had witnessed the slap earlier that day. "Yo, have you seen the news?" the message read. "The cop who slapped that girl? He's been put on paid leave. The whole thing is blowing up on social media." His pulse quickened. He had known in his gut that the world couldn't just look away. People were starting to talk. The injustice, the raw unfairness of it all, was being noticed. But what did this mean for the girl and her father? Was this just the beginning of something bigger? He thought about them again, about the father, who had stood there, recording the scene, silently bearing the weight of a system that had failed them both. And about the girl, who had endured something that would forever change her perception of the world. Would they get the justice they deserved? The bus jolted forward again, its wheels screeching as it moved through the city, and the teen's mind snapped back to his own situation. The note. The opportunity. Was he ready to seize it? His fingers shook as he slid the note into his pocket. He didn't know what he was going to do yet, but something inside him told him that the choice he made in the next few hours could change everything. Meanwhile, the father, still standing on that same street corner, felt his own sense of urgency building. The video was now in the hands of several local news stations. His phone buzzed with new notifications. People were starting to ask questions. Was this the moment when things would finally change? He knew that it was only a matter of time before the story reached the wider public, but what would happen when it did? Would it be enough to hold the officer accountable? Or would it simply fizzle out, like so many injustices before it? As he waited, his mind raced through the possibilities. There was a chance this could be the spark that ignited a movement, a chance that the voices of the oppressed could finally be heard. But he couldn't shake the feeling that this was just the beginning of something much larger, something he wasn't fully prepared for. What would it take to turn the tide? He had spent his life watching the world turn its back on people like him, like his daughter, and now he found himself standing in the middle of it all, holding onto a fragile thread of hope. And just as the tension in the air reached its peak, everything seemed to come to a halt. The teen's phone buzzed again, this time with an unknown number. His breath caught in his throat.
Was this it?
He thought, as he hesitated for a second before answering. Hello. His voice sounded unsteady, as if the weight of everything was coming down on him all at once. Is this the young man who helped the pregnant woman on the bus? A calm voice on the other end asked. Yes, that's me. The teen replied, his heart pounding in his chest. There was a pause on the other end, as if the person was considering their next words carefully. We've been watching you, the voice finally said. We know what you've been through, what you've witnessed today. There's an opportunity for you to make a real impact. Meet me at the old diner on 5th and Main in 1 hour. Don't tell anyone. Come alone. The line clicked, and the teen was left standing in stunned silence. The words lingered in the air, thick with both promise and danger. Was this the moment he had been waiting for? Was this the chance he needed to finally make a difference? Back on the street, the father was watching his daughter, who had been silent ever since the slap. She had been quiet, deep in thought, her eyes distant. He wanted to ask her what she was feeling, wanted to somehow help her understand the magnitude of what was happening.
But he knew it was more complicated than that.
He could see the anger bubbling inside her, the same anger he had felt for so many years. She was learning, in real time, what it meant to live in a world that didn't always care about fairness. But even as he watched her, he knew the true storm was still on the horizon. Whatever happened next, he had to be ready to fight for something bigger than just himself. He couldn't afford to stand by and hope for change. The world was changing around him, and if he didn't act, the moment would slip away, just like so many others before it. The teen and the father were now both standing at the edges of their lives, unknowingly linked by a series of events that neither fully understood. What would happen when they finally met? Would the tension they felt find its release, or would the pressure build until it became unbearable? As the world moved relentlessly forward, one thing was certain. Something was about to snap, and when it did, it would change everything. As the teen's phone slipped from his hand, the weight of the conversation began to settle deep into his gut. The air inside the bus felt suffocating now, thick with the sense that something was about to change in ways he couldn't control. 1 hour. That's all he had before he was supposed to meet someone who seemed to know everything about him, someone who was offering him a chance to do something bigger than himself. But was it real? Or was it a trap? The possibilities swirled in his mind, each more unsettling than the last. His fingers instinctively reached for the note again, crumpling it in his hand. But there was no way to ignore it. 1 hour, it was both an eternity and a heartbeat away. The world outside seemed to blur as the bus moved through the city, as though time was stretching and contracting all at once. His heart pounded in his chest, his thoughts racing. He had always been the quiet one, the observer, the one who never got involved. But now, everything had changed. The slap. The note. The phone call. It was all coming together, and he didn't know if he was ready for it. He didn't even know who to trust anymore. What if this was a setup? What if the person on the other end of the line was just playing him, pulling his strings like a puppet? But then again, what if it wasn't? What if this was his chance to finally step into a world where he could make a real difference? His thoughts were interrupted by a sudden loud noise, his phone buzzing again. This time, it was a new notification, A message from the same friend who had sent him the earlier news about the officer being placed on leave. The message was short but striking. Something's off. The cop? He didn't just slap her. I overheard the officers talking. There's more to the story. It's bad. Really bad. Be careful. The teen's breath caught in his throat. The cop didn't just slap the girl? The realization hit him hard. He thought back to the earlier scene, the way the officer had acted so coldly, so indifferently. But what if there was something more sinister happening behind the scenes? The more he thought about it, the more the puzzle pieces started to fall into place. If the officer had done more than just slap the girl, what was the real story? What was the system hiding? His mind snapped back to the note in his pocket. The woman on the bus, the mysterious phone call. Everything felt connected. What if this wasn't just a chance to get involved in some vague movement? What if he was being pulled into something much bigger, something that could uncover the truth about the officer, the girl, and the father? Was he ready to expose it all? At that moment, as he stared out the bus window, the streetlights casting long shadows across the pavement, a car pulled up beside the bus. For a fleeting second, he thought it was just a coincidence, another part of the busy city flow, but something about it caught his eye. It was a black sedan, sleek and inconspicuous, but it was moving in tandem with the bus, keeping pace. The teen couldn't help but feel a prickle of unease. Could it be that the person who had called him was watching him? Could this be the first sign that he was already being dragged into something much darker than he realized? The car sped up, just slightly, as the bus hit the next intersection, and then the lights flickered on the bus, briefly casting everything into darkness. The teen's heart slammed against his ribs. The bus's lights flickered back on, and the car was gone, but the sense of being watched, of being followed, lingered. He glanced around, trying to gauge if anyone else had noticed, but the other passengers were absorbed in their own worlds, oblivious to the quiet tension mounting. His mind raced. Who had been in that car? Was it someone connected to the mysterious caller? Was it someone who knew about the note? Or was it the officer, coming to silence him before he could dig deeper into the truth? Before he could think further, the bus came to another stop, and he stepped off, his feet unsteady as the world around him seemed to spin. It was as if the very air had thickened, each breath a struggle to clear his thoughts. 1 hour. He had to get to the diner, and quickly. But even as he moved through the city streets, every footstep felt like it was echoing in a vacuum, each one growing louder with the weight of what was to come. The father, meanwhile, had just left his apartment building, still clutching his phone, trying to process everything that had happened. His daughter had gone to her room, shutting herself off from him, and he didn't blame her. How could he explain to her what it meant to live in a world where the deck was stacked against them, where a single moment of injustice could go unnoticed, unpunished? He had tried to call the local authorities, hoping to raise awareness about the incident, but the response had been lackluster at best. They promised to look into it, but he knew better than to expect anything to come from that. It was the same old story, empty words and nothing to back them up. His phone buzzed again, another message from a news outlet. He had been interviewed earlier in the day, his story broadcasted on local news channels. But this new message was different. It contained a link to an online video, one that was rapidly going viral. It showed a different angle of the confrontation, one that hadn't been seen before, a perspective that had been captured by another bystander who had been too afraid to speak up. In the video, it became painfully clear that the officer had not just slapped the girl in anger. The footage showed the officer's hand reaching toward her, but then there was a brief, subtle movement, a moment when it seemed like he was pulling something from his uniform, something hidden just beneath the surface of the exchange. It was a flash, barely noticeable, but to those who knew what to look for, it was unmistakable. The officer had done more than strike her. He had planted something on her, something that could change everything. The father's breath caught in his throat as he replayed the video, his mind reeling. What had the officer done? And why had he planted something on the girl? Was this the key to everything? Was this the twist that could finally bring justice? The stakes had just risen. The conflict was no longer just about one slap. It was about exposing a system that went far deeper than either the teen or the father could have ever imagined. What would they do with this knowledge? How would they navigate this increasingly dangerous path they were on? Neither of them knew yet, but one thing was for sure. They were standing on the brink of something massive, and there was no turning back now. The diner on 5th and Main was just as the teen had imagined, old, worn down, with a flickering neon sign above the door that buzzed erratically, casting an eerie glow over the quiet street. His footsteps echoed in the empty space as he walked inside, his nerves at a breaking point. He scanned the room quickly, his eyes searching for any sign of the person who had called him. His heart raced, not just because of the mystery, but because he knew this was the moment that could change everything. In the far corner of the diner, a figure sat alone at a booth. A man, dressed in a plain black jacket, his face partially obscured by the brim of a baseball cap. The teen hesitated for a moment, unsure whether to approach, but his instincts pushed him forward. He couldn't turn back now. As he slid into the booth across from the man, the stranger gave him a small, almost imperceptible nod, acknowledging his presence. He didn't waste time on pleasantries. "You came," the man said, his voice low and deliberate. "That's good. It means you understand what's at stake." The teen swallowed hard, trying to steady his breath. "What do you want from me?" The man smiled faintly, his eyes never leaving the teen's face. "What we need is someone who isn't afraid to expose the truth. Someone who isn't blinded by the system, by the lies. You've seen what happened. The cop, the girl, the video. You know it's just the tip of the iceberg." The teen's mind raced. He couldn't believe how quickly everything had escalated. The woman on the bus, the phone call, the video, it was all connected. The truth was right there in front of him, and he was beginning to understand just how deep it went. But what did the man want from him? I don't understand," the teen said, his voice trembling slightly. "What truth? What are you talking about?" The man leaned in, his voice barely above a whisper. "The officer who slapped the girl didn't just do it because of some personal vendetta. He was part of something much bigger, a network of corruption, of illegal activities. He planted something on her, something they wanted to frame her for. You've seen the footage. The video is just the beginning." The teen felt a cold shiver run down his spine. He had suspected it, but hearing it confirmed was a gut punch. The corruption went deeper than he could have ever imagined. The girl, the father, none of them were safe. The officer was just a small part of a much larger, dangerous game. Before he could process the full extent of what he was hearing, the door to the diner opened with a sudden jingle, and the father walked in. His face was grim, his eyes filled with determination. He froze when he saw the teen, but there was no time for surprises. His gaze shifted to the man in the booth, narrowing with recognition. "What the hell is going on here?" the father demanded, his voice low but filled with authority. The teen's stomach twisted as the pieces began to fall into place. This wasn't just some random meeting. The man across from him wasn't just a stranger, it was someone connected to the very system they had both been fighting against. "I think you know exactly what's going on," the man said, his tone icy now. "You've been watching, just like everyone else. But now, you're both in the middle of it. There's no turning back." The father's eyes flickered to the teen, a mix of confusion and anger playing across his features. "What's he talking about? Who are you?" Before the man could respond, the sound of a car engine revving outside broke through the tension. The father's hand instinctively went to his jacket pocket, where he had his phone ready to record anything suspicious. He wasn't about to let this moment slip away. But then, everything happened in a flash. The man stood up abruptly, pulling a gun from beneath his jacket and pointing it directly at the father. The teen's heart stopped, the reality of the situation crashing down on him. "No!" the teen shouted, standing up as well, his hands raised. "What are you doing? What do you want from us?" The man's eyes were cold and calculating. "What I want is simple. I want the video. The video that's been circulating online. You've both made a mistake. You think you can change something? You think you can expose the system? You're just pawns in a game far bigger than you realize." The father's face hardened, his hand inching closer to his phone, but the man saw it. He smirked. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." The door to the diner opened again, and this time, a figure stepped inside, a woman, dressed in all black, her eyes hidden behind large sunglasses. She moved swiftly toward the booth, taking a seat next to the man, her presence unmistakable. "Is everything in place?" the man asked without looking at her. The woman nodded, her gaze flicking over to the father and teen. "It's done. The authorities are already moving on the video. The trap is set. They won't escape this time." The father's voice was a low growl. "Who are you people? What do you want?" The woman leaned back, crossing her arms. "What we want is simple. We want control. We want the power to shape the world however we see fit. And we'll make sure no one stands in our way, especially not you two." The tension was unbearable. The teen felt as though the ground was shifting beneath him. He had been led into this meeting, this confrontation, thinking he was fighting for justice, for the girl, for the father. But now it seemed like everything he had believed in was slipping away. The truth wasn't what he thought it was. The people he had trusted, the people he had hoped would help him, were just as corrupted as the system he was trying to expose. Suddenly, the sound of sirens wailed outside, cutting through the tension like a knife. The father's eyes widened.
He knew what that meant.
The man's smirk grew wider. "Too late," he said, his voice dripping with contempt. "The game is already over." But then something unexpected happened. The woman's phone buzzed, and her face turned pale as she looked at the screen. Her expression shifted from confidence to panic. She muttered something under her breath and then stood up abruptly. "Get out of here. Now," she hissed, grabbing the man's arm. But before they could make a move, the front door of the diner burst open with a deafening crash. A group of armed officers stormed in, their weapons drawn. The father and teen froze as they realized who was leading the charge. It was the officer from earlier, the one who had slapped the girl, but now he was in full uniform, his face twisted in a look of pure rage. "What's going on here?" the officer demanded, his voice cold and authoritative. The woman turned to face him, her eyes wide with fear.
"You don't understand.
This isn't." But it was too late. The officer reached into his jacket and pulled out an envelope, holding it up for everyone to see. "It's over," he said quietly. "We've been tracking you all along." And just like that, everything began to unravel. The officer wasn't just another cog in the corrupt machine. He was a double agent, working to bring down the very system he had once served. The people in the booth, the man and the woman, were part of a larger conspiracy that had been manipulating both the teen and the father all along. In the chaos that followed, as the officers moved in and the man and woman were arrested, the teen and the father exchanged a look. It was a silent acknowledgement that the battle was far from over, but for the first time, they felt like they might actually have a chance to win. But the final twist? The last unexpected turn in this story? The video, the one they had thought was their only weapon, was never truly about exposing the truth. It was a carefully constructed lie, a bait, meant to draw them in. The real truth had been hidden all along, and now, the true game was only just beginning. The scene inside the diner was chaos. The man and the woman, now in handcuffs, were being led away by officers, their faces betraying the shock of being outmaneuvered at the last moment. The teen and the father stood there, stunned by the turn of events. They had expected the worst, but not this. The officer, who had once been their enemy, had turned the tables. The man, who had seemed so powerful, was now powerless. For a moment, it felt like the world had been flipped upside down. The father let out a long breath, his hand still gripping the back of the booth, as if trying to hold on to some semblance of control. The teen stood frozen, his mind racing to piece together what had just happened. It felt like a dream, too surreal to be real. But it was real, and the reality of it was sinking in. The officer approached them, his expression no longer cold, but something warmer, more human. He nodded at the father, a silent acknowledgement of their shared struggle. "You were right," the officer said quietly. "You were right to question the system. It's been rotten for a long time." The father looked at him, his eyes narrowing slightly.
"What do you mean by that?"
"You were the one who—" The officer raised a hand to stop him. "I was. I admit it. But I wasn't working alone. I had been a part of something bigger, something that pulled the strings from the shadows." It took me years to see through it, but once I did, I knew I had to take them down from the inside. It wasn't easy. They had eyes everywhere. But when I saw what was happening to you and your daughter, I knew I had to act. The teen stepped forward, his voice still shaky from the adrenaline. So, you. I planted the evidence on her, the officer confessed, his voice heavy with regret. I was forced to. But that was only a small part of the plan. The real goal was always to discredit you, to make you think you were fighting for justice when you were actually playing into their hands. The teen's mind whirled. Everything they had believed, everything they had fought for, had been manipulated. The video, the note, the bus incident. It was all part of the scheme, carefully crafted to keep them in the dark, to keep them from seeing the truth. But the officer had seen it. He had broken free, and now he was helping them, helping the father and daughter. The father, still processing the magnitude of what had just been revealed, let out a bitter laugh. So, you were part of the system all along? And now you're telling me you've changed sides? The officer nodded, his eyes dark with guilt. I know it's hard to believe. I would have felt the same way once, but the corruption runs deeper than you know. I had to make the choice. Help you, or watch everything continue to crumble. For a moment, no one said anything. The weight of the situation hung heavy in the air, the silence broken only by the sound of distant sirens. The teen turned to look at the man and woman being taken away, their faces now a mixture of anger and defeat. They had been part of a much larger conspiracy, but now they were going to face the consequences of their actions. So, what happens now? The teen asked, his voice quiet but determined. The officer glanced around, checking to make sure the coast was clear before speaking again. Now, we clean up the mess. We expose the people at the top, the ones who've been pulling the strings for years. And you. He looked at the father and teen. You too will be a part of that. You've seen what's really going on and you have a voice now. People will listen to you. The father shook his head, still reeling. You're asking us to trust you? After everything that's happened? The officer's face softened. I'm asking for a chance. A chance to make things right. But it's going to take all of us. The video you've got, the one they tried to use against you, it's not the whole story. The real story is bigger than just one slap. It's a system that's been broken for a long time. And now, it's time to fix it. The teen glanced at the father, who was still processing the enormity of the situation. He could see the hesitation in the older man's eyes. The weight of the past was heavy, and it wasn't easy to let go of the anger, the distrust. But there was something else, something that had been building in him ever since the encounter with the officer. Hope. A flicker of hope that maybe, just maybe, they could be part of something bigger than themselves. They could fight back, not just for the girl, but for everyone who had been silenced, for everyone who had been oppressed by the system. We'll help, the teen said, his voice steady now. But we're doing this our way. We won't let them twist the truth again. The officer nodded, a hint of a smile tugging at his lips. I wouldn't expect anything less. As they left the diner, the weight of the moment still hung in the air. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the city, but there was a sense of something new in the air, a sense of possibility. The fight wasn't over. It had only just begun. The teen thought about the girl, the father, the system that had failed them all. They had been pawns in a game, but now they had a chance to turn the tables. The next step would be dangerous, but they were ready. They had to be. As they walked down the street, the officer gave them one last piece of advice. The truth isn't easy to uncover, but it's the only thing worth fighting for. Remember that. And with that, they parted ways, each of them carrying the burden of everything that had come before, but also the hope that together, they could change something. They had a voice now, and the world would have to listen. But in the back of the teen's mind, something still nagged at him. The story wasn't over.
Not yet.
There were more pieces to find, more truths to uncover. And he was ready to face whatever came next. The last thing he saw as he walked away was the neon sign above the diner, buzzing erratically, casting a flickering light on the street. It felt like a metaphor for the world they lived in, broken, flawed, but still trying to shine through the darkness.